Okay, hello, this is George Lees talking from Kelso in the Scottish Borders, and I'm going to be talking to John Paterson in East Sussex about the Rothschild Dynasty and about how they have taken ownership of all of the world's issuance of money in every nation state across the world now, finishing in Iran and Iraq, and Cuba was one of the last to go. Libya was one of the last to go, and the brutalization of Iraq and Afghanistan was explicitly for that purpose, but also in Afghanistan for the vast narcotics wealth. Now, the Rothschilds are a family that I lived very near to in Hertfordshire in England, but they've got 5 brothers that way back in the 18th century lived in the ghettos of Frankfurt, and they were sent out as the 5 arrows to lead the major metropolitan cities in a variety of countries. So it was Paris, London, Frankfurt, where else, John?
Germany, Austria.
What's the one in Italy where they have all the water and the canals?
Venice.
Yeah, is that the 5th one? And then eventually, of course, when it became a priority for them, they had to have a North American presence, and that North American presence was there in time to manipulate entirely the independence revolution, the wars of independence, and then the war between the slave nations, the slave states, and the people that wanted to emancipate the slaves, which led to a massive diaspora into the cities, and that coincides with the loss of the need for slaves as physical labour on the plantations. They were replaced by the internal combustion engine and the tractor, effectively. In wartime, they were replaced by tanks, and that meant a lot of them were conscripted in the conflicts that followed over the centuries, and frankly they have just been culled. That's white men, black men, Asian men, women, children, innocent bystanders. Everywhere they go, both sides are funded by the same funders, by the same controllers of the media companies, or the racing pigeons, or the taxi services. Everywhere they can get a fast buck, they make a fast buck. They take control of those central banks by crashing the stock markets in engineered crashes, which occurred in the UK in 1815, after the Napoleonic Wars. So the news was released that Napoleon was winning, the English stock market crashes. I forget the name of the Rothschild individual that sequestered all of the shares at that time, released them cheap.
It was Lionel.
Was it Lionel?
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, if you want to see this for yourself, there is an excellent film made by Darryl Zanuck in Zionist Hollywood in the 1930s. It's an excellent portrayal of how they steal from the taxman, how they scam everybody in the discussions on the negotiation of international munitions contracts and the funding of wars on both sides. You see how it works, and you see how mentally agile these people are.
And that's on YouTube.
Yes,
free.
you can get that for free, and I watched it only a fortnight ago, and it makes a huge impression on you every time you watch it. Okay, so I just want to train the world. I've trained 2 of you today who are in my local region how to use a company check system. Now, if you hit companycheck.co.uk on the search engine, you'll get into that thing which you can see in front of my camera now. It says know who you're dealing with, as if they're trying to intimidate people who come in to investigate it but are just laymen. But I know who I'm dealing with, and the beauty of company check is that if you suspect someone of being a financial criminal, you can find exactly which boardrooms they operate out of, which director IDs they use, and how many fraudulent director IDs there are. Okay, so I'll introduce you to the software system, and then we'll talk at the end of the tutorial. Effectively, I want the whole world to learn how to do this. It's only applicable at the moment to British people, But as you'll hear at the end, we are going to be suggesting to our local MPs and to cabinet members that if this system were cleaned up and made more thorough, it could put the money back into every national treasury that is now led to the massive sovereign debt scandal. All of democracy's money has disappeared into private funds. Most of them are run by the Rothschilds and the breeding chambers that they have run over 3 centuries. Yeah, in other words, they infiltrate the royal bedrooms all across Europe initially, and they sire the children that become the monarchs and the world leaders, and eventually that runs into the new world, and it becomes inextricably linked to the governance of the whole world. So the things that you see on the media now are just diversions from all of the relatively petty financial crimes that are occurring now, compared to taking over the complete ownership of all of the world's central banks. They've got that project finished now, and what they're doing is just releasing propaganda in Ukraine, in Syria, and from Prince Charles in Canada about what Putin's doing. Putin is just a member of this team, relatively low down the food chain and the hierarchy. They are all in the G8 and the G20 countries, some of the Arabic nations, and some of the hangers-on that you see. So it's something like G30 to G35. All of the countries that run Grand Prix events and have elite yachts and sports like that and horse racing, they are at the trough. Okay, and the elected leaders are just puppets that have been picked by the money lenders, and they have been picked for the sins that they have already committed, so that they then can become coercion tools, and when people are asking them to make a decision for their country, they always make the wrong decision, so that the profiteers can profit and the country can lose its capability, its sovereignty, and everything that should by right be in its treasury. Yeah, so everything that happens in the public sector should be funded from the central bank, and if Alex Salmond cottons onto that in time, he can have a free, independent and prosperous country. Anyway, let me show you how to use Company Check. So John, can you get Company Check up on screen?
Yeah, I've got it here, George.
Okay, and there's a couple of search boxes on it, and if you just type in Rothschild and press the return button, you will be stunned.
Oh, it's endless.
Yeah, read out the statistics you can now see. How many companies in the UK? No, companies on the left hand side. Companies for 1 foot. How many directors in the UK?
276.
276. How many sole traders?
34.
How many European companies?
262.
Yeah, so that must be getting on for overall way over 500 hits, almost 600 hits.
Yeah.
Just with the use of one word. Now, people who follow Andrew Carrington Hitchcock and his website, or have read his books about the history of this, they will be fascinated by this, because when you look at it, it's quite apparent that when you look at comparative companies or big banks in the P2 sector, like the HSBC, that what we have in these financial institutions in London now is relatively chicken feed. But because there's so many of them, we cannot be sure of what actually is in them, because they launder it around. When there's some tax to be paid, as you see in the movie made by Daryl Zanuck, they hide the stuff under the boards of the floor. Yeah, they pretend that they can only afford really cheap wine that gives you gut aches, but this is compared to the HSBC and Santander and all those massive New World Order banks, it's chicken feed. But they also own the New World Order banks. They own the corrupted auditors indirectly, like KPMG that we talked about the other day. Yeah, and the KPMG frauds are massive. They've got huge numbers of live directors at any one time, and many subsidiaries in each of the companies. and it's a global nightmare because the auditors confirm the methods that you used to steal, and they're supposed to check the accounts, and they just
they all protect each other.
yes, but there's only a tiny number of them, and when we teach the people who are paying the bedroom tax, who are going to the DSS and get some sort of paltry check, because our government has been vicious enough to take all of our jobs away from our children's region and send them into the globalised world where labour is cheap and tax does not have to be paid at all.
It's important that people need to. I picked it up thanks to you, George. You're very good at explaining things. So let's go through it so that
well, we can't go through it all, but I want people to know.
Idea, where to start.
Well,
then you can just trial and error, make mistakes, but
because we can scan through it for about half an hour, and we can pick some of them or strike you as something that we need to investigate. The first one at the top is Rothschild Limited, active. That means it's not dormant, it's not been dissolved, it's not been crashed, it's still sitting there. It's got cash at the bank of 0. It's got a net worth of 0. It's got assets of 0. It's got liabilities of 0.
0, yeah.
So they're going to deploy that sometime in the future.
Yeah.
It's at New Court, St Swithin's Lane, London, EC4N 8AL. Okay? Now we could open that, but it's relatively boring. But let's have a look at who the directors are. So click on Rothschild Limited, and then click on directors. Yeah? Can you do that?
Yeah, I've got directors and secretaries.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. So these are the relatively short lists compared to some of the geopolitical things that we've seen in the past. Yeah. Let me just run you through it. Anne-Marie Sizer, Mr. Jonathan Westcott, M. Rothschilds and Sons Limited, Anne-Marie Sizer, that's the same person, so that will be a director and a secretary for a period of time. Mr. Adrian Edward King, now that could be Mervyn. Yeah, you get the picture? That's Mervyn King, the head of the central bank. They're allowed to use whatever initials they dream up.
Okay.
You know Mervyn King that was in Petty France and led the English central bank for a long time, and he was very powerful in his position in power at the Bank of England, because what he did was to refuse to engage in regulation. Can you think of a reason for that if he were to be on the board of the first Rothschild company that we open up in a list of 600? Or even if it was his son or his nephew, that might be a conflict of interest. But if you decide to give up on regulation for the whole of your period in office, before you give the economic lecture to Radio 4 today, just as you drop out, and you pass it on to the Canadian boss who gets £800,000 a year and £250,000 laundering allowance for his house expenses. The laundering word was completely deliberate. Okay, the next director below, Adrian Edward King, and you understand that Adrian is a joke about Arian and Arius Piso, but let's keep to the financial facts. Mr. Alan Philip Graham, Mr. David Kenneth Riches, Mr. Roderick David Clarence Ando. Now when I see the name Clarence now, I quiver in fear that this is an absolute fraud, because Clarence is a character. Clarence in the film It's a Wonderful Life is actually an angel who comes down to talk to James Stewart, who's the actor who plays the head of the building and loan company. And James Stewart, because of a very vicious moneylender that lives in his town called Potter. Now the Potter joke is a joke about the ashes in the Bible, in the Old Testament, or it may be the New Testament, I forget, but the Potter's ashes are actually mentioned in I think it's the Jesus story, in the last few days of his life, in inverted commas. Yeah, and sorry, what was that? How did I start that? Pottersville. Yeah, so the scenarios, the Clarence character is the person who comes down to earth to revive the spirits of the man who's rendered despondent because an incompetent colleague of his, who looks just like, who's the richest American on the globe? He bought up huge chunks of Tesco's when they pumped and dumped it with insider trading knowledge. Warren Buffett.
Oh, sorry, Warren Buffett. Okay.
Yeah, the character in the Building and Loan that lost the money, put it inside his newspaper, forgot he'd put it there, and passed it over to Potter without realising it. So the whole of the monthly income for the Building and Loan was given to the loan shark that was trying to get them shut down. And when the director of the company, who's a heroic figure in that film, played by James Stewart, learns this, he goes on a drinking binge, he punches various school teachers and things, and he gets hopelessly drunk. And then, when he's contemplating committing suicide on the town bridge, it's my favourite film, and every time I think about how...
George, I know exactly how you feel. I get moments like this, mate. It's powerful stuff.
So when the local hero that tries to build houses that are cheap enough for all of the locals to have decency, and the loan shark interrupts that, he does not declare that the money's in the newspaper, he just tucks it into his pocket or into his desk drawer, and then he monitors the situation closely for when he can crash everything and take it all over. But the man is standing on the bridge in the town, having crashed his car into a tree, and he's contemplating suicide.
I know it. It's hard to get.
And it's really corny that you can believe in angels and stuff like that, but the man comes down beside him, and
he's just imprinted in your mind, and it's hard to look. Especially if, you're a compassionate guy, so am I. You feel for other people. So that was a powerful scene. Very powerful.
So what happens instead, James Stewart is swithering on the brink. Suddenly this character appears to him, and he does not talk to him initially. He just gets on the parapet and jumps in. That's the angel that was sent down by God. You get a little bit of footage with the conversation with God, that if Clarence the angel comes down and he makes a good job of saving this man's life, he will win. Sorry, every time I think about it, it just...
I know it, George.
He will win.
Tough.
He's an angel apprentice, but if he wins this case, he will win his wings and become a mature angel in heaven. Okay? So the story unfolds. The man who was going to commit suicide says to him, I wish I'd never lived, I would not have got my company into this problem. So the angel says, that's what you think, we can create that for you. And they show what the world would be like had he not been born in his hometown and sacrificed the whole of his career to save it. Yeah?
Yes.
I wish you could talk for a bit.
Yeah.
So this...
I saw that movie so many years ago. I was a young lad, and it was probably the first time that I welled up watching a movie. It's a powerful, very powerful movie, and
so what I'm telling you now is that when you see the name Clarence, it's associated with a joke at the people's expense that follow that film. Because what they do now is, I don't know about this Roderick David Clarence Ando, because I've never opened this web page before, but some of the Clarences that I've been looking into involving names that I would rather not declare, because some of them are very close to more domestic issues for me, and I can explain that at a later date when it's all over with. But the Clarence names that have cropped up and I've seen, when you see that person, you try and find any newspaper coverage of that person and their life and career, and you see that they're in a certain location and they've got registered numbers and they've got corporate details like everybody else, and then you find that they're on the Forbes and Debrets listing as the world's richest people. And then you find that when you look on the Google search engines or Google Images, that they don't exist. So they've invented it as just a vent to create money for a director that never existed. And when you see the companies that are using that, most of them are involved in those networks. You know that spoken wheel model that we talk about all the time?
Yeah.
Where the monarchs and the money lenders and the Rothschilds are at the hub. The relatively low lives are out in the periphery, but they are the members of the Rotary Club. What's the one, what's the other for the elderly people in the business sector? Oh, the Probus Club.
Oh, Probus.
Yeah, so if you're over a certain age, you become a Probus member. If you're a youngster and entrepreneur, then you stay in the Rotary Club. And it was you who pointed out to me for the first time that when you see that image of the sun, that at the hub, it's like the hub of the wheel.
Yeah, yeah.
And out at the end of the sun's rays, you're at the edge of the wheel, i.e. the rim or the tyre.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
there's a huge Rotary following where I live, George.
yeah. So what I'm saying is that now that they think that they are really clever, they can put non-existent human characters into director listings so that they can just take it for themselves. Does that make sense? Now, I've never looked for Roderick, David, Clarence, Ando in my life, and I'm really pleased that I actually lived, because with you and me and people that we're talking to like Gordon Bowden and all the brave investigators that are prepared to run into the wind here with the risk that they fall foul of the assassination bureaus that the Rothschilds have run for several centuries, and you know all about those issues. We're not so sure about whether or not the elites like the Tsar were actually executed, or that's a nice story, because the man Romanov that came to steal from Hearts with his own merchant bank, he's getting that case regulated. He's taken all of the assets out of Heart of Midlothian Football Club, and they're now back in, it's either Lithuania or Ukraine. I think it's Lithuania. And the receivership issues, i.e. the legal investigation into who gets what, is now in the hands of bankers from other countries who have become head of the central bank in Lithuania. It is quite tragic. So they get to rule the roost, they get to cast judgments on the stealing of Heart of Midlothian in Edinburgh football fans' money into a different continent. And when that man came to Scotland, have you seen the Local Hero film about the entrepreneurs coming in and taking up a Scottish beach?
Oh, this was years ago.
Yeah.
I remember that, George.
Yeah, and you remember the Russians coming in and having a good time in the parties and drinking the vodka?
Yes.
So Romanov, which is exactly the same name as the Tsars that are reputed to be insolvent or non-existent or extinct now because of the massacre by the Rothschilds. I can't mind what year that was. It was very close to 1815 as well, I think. Was it?
Offhand, George.
When the Tsar was killed and his family?
It was in the 1800s, but could have been later.
Yeah, well, anybody can look that up on Wikipedia. And where was I on that? So I was telling you about Romanov. So when Romanov came to Scotland, how did he come here, do you think?
I couldn't tell you.
A submarine.
Seriously?
Yeah, military submarine, his own, and he went home on it.
Well,
yeah, the man has defrauded the tax man in Britain. The Hearts people did not get paid on time. They had to plead for their salaries. And I think I've explained to you in several discussions in the past, I will not reveal who my friend is, who I talked to. I knew he was a Hearts supporter. And I said to him, it's tragic what's happened there, isn't it? And you can see how the directors are just asset stripping the fans. And he said, yeah, I see it from a different perspective, George, because I'm a shareholder and we did okay out the whole deal. Yeah, so the fans get defrauded, the shareholders get a bun, and everybody's happy, and Romanov screws off again in his submarine. That's a joke about the screw on the submarine, driving him back across the Atlantic, across the Baltic, and suddenly he's back in Lithuania. and they're milking now the EU of, I forget what the Lithuanian currency was, but they're now imposing the euro and all of those scams that we talked about 2 days ago. Shall we explore some more of the Rothschild's companies? I've got my composure back about the angel. Everything turned out good in the end of that film. The bank was rendered solvent again because ordinary people in the local region were not prepared to greedily take all of their money out so that company would crash and the evil moneylender could prevail and fail to build any housing schemes for them at all. Yeah, it's a really touching movie. It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a must watch.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably be able to get that on DVD now, but I'm not sure. I've still got.
It may even be on YouTube.
No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
Right then. So let's click the back button and go back to the list of. Do you want to start on directors or do you want to start on companies? So go back to that introductory page where we put Rothschilds in and we got the 600 hits.
Yes.
So let's go companies first, because I know a little bit of what we've got in store there. Let's start with Rothschild Australia Holdings. It's about 4th or 5th down.
So now this is where you've got 149 companies.
Yes, so go down to Rothschilds Australia. Yeah, when I tell my students in New Zealand that they don't own the banks in New Zealand, that New Zealand as a country or as a series of individuals, they don't actually own the banks that trade in New Zealand. They're owned out of here, this network. Yeah, and that's difficult to believe, but you understand how the central banks how it works.
Yeah.
And how the issuance of money in those central banks is all indirectly controlled by this dynasty. So let's now open up Rothschild Australia Holdings, or let's have a look at its directors.
Okay.
It's got cash at 52,000 at the bank. It's got 11 million as a net worth. Its assets are only 55 grand and it has no liabilities at all. We'll click on the directors now and see what we get. And what we get is...
Oh no, it's okay. I thought that was Balfour. It's Balber.
Yeah, it could well be a derivation. You know how easily they do that. I've explained to you Walter Balfour Corbett. Ronnie Balfour Corbett and the insertion of the Balfour, or the deletion of it for shame.
Okay, yeah.
That bank in the middle of that often comes into our storyline, NM Rothschild and Sons Limited. Yeah. And at the top you've got a Coughlin, you've got Mr. Donald Gordon, Mr. Mark Leslie Crump, Mr. William Barber, whether that's the guys that make the coats in the old days, I don't know, Mr. Andrew Didham, Mr. Andrew William Truvell. So there's no big villains on there, but we could then look at the board of NM Rothschilds and Sons, and that will be littered with massive world figures. I've explained to you that NATO's generals are on the boards of these banks, that leading politicians, that Prince Charles and the Prince's Trust are on it, that the Murdoch families are on these boards, and that Henry Kissinger and all of the people like, who's the man who's had the heart attack at Oxford? Lord Patton, on the Oxford Russia Fund. That is not a Rothschild institution, but it's a similar concept, that the whole of that vast country of Russia, despite the demonization of Mr. Putin, the whole thing is in the control of people in London, Washington, Frankfurt, Paris, and all of those 5 cities, and wherever they think it's important now. I'm led to believe that in Brussels the European parliamentarians only spend 3 days a week in Brussels because they want to render the world chaotic rather than capable. They have to go for 2 days every week to Frankfurt, so it becomes more expensive. That's how trivial and futile it is. So I've explained to you that if you're the opposition in Scotland and you don't get elected, you get in anyway, so that we can have some opposition in the building.
That's it.
Right, So let's have a look, because that was not very enlightening, because none of those are famous names. And let's go back and just run our way down. We can read off as we go what we find. So Rothschild Trust Corporation Limited, Rothschild Diamonds Limited. That looks like an interesting one. Diamonds, you know, it's not all just fiat currency. We're talking about diamonds. So that will be Sub-Saharan Africa's wealth. Yeah, you know all about the diamonds, and you know about the diamonds and the pearls that we talked about in the Santiago globalized Hispanic missions down into the South Pacific, into Latin America, where they imposed the peso as the currency. Yeah, let's have a look at that. This is in Wimpole Street, 40 to 41 Wimpole Street. A net worth of only $1.5 million. That's chicken feed for this dynasty. Yeah, it's chicken feed for the big banks like the HSBC, Santander, the hopelessly corrupted toxic debt pool of the Lloyds Banking Group. Yeah, they have got $1 trillion debt burdens, and they keep selling it on so that the debt burden gets bigger. None of the regulators do anything about that, which is why Mervyn King is such a batard. Mervyn King trained all of the people that are now the central bankers around the world in Basel, which is part of that Basel faulty joke that we talk about all the time.
Yep, yep.
Okay, let's have a look at who the directors are on the Diamonds Consortium. Oh, we've got Rothschilds. Yeah, you can see that they're attracted to the wealth. Christopher Adam John Rothschild, Jeremy Mark Edward Rothschild, Jeremy Mark Edward Rothschild. That's an overlap, same period of time, still in office. Mr. Simon, or he will be running the secretarial systems for them at the same time as he is a director. And he likely gets paid for both jobs. But money and income is not a concern for these people, as we've talked about in the recent past. You said to me the other day, how do they possibly spend it, George? And there is no answer to that. They cannot spend what they have in multiple lifetimes. Okay? And then we've got further down the list, we get Mary Murrison, Charles Francis Percy Wyndham, I don't know what the first name, is it a Mr. Gerald Leonard Solomon Rothschild? And again, he's registered twice as if he's doing the secretarial and the directorial job. You've got Richard Gordon Williams, Alison Mary Rothschild. So that's quite a nice little bundle there. And it's the first one where we found authentic Rothschilds all stacked up. At the bottom, you've got thin blue lines. Can you read out what those companies are?
I'm on a different page, George.
Oh, sorry, it's Tyrolese Directors Limited, Tyrolese Secretarial Limited, and then just for the hell of it, in exactly the same period of time, which was exactly less than a fortnight in 1996, they had 3 overlapping companies that have in some way laundered cash out of that and into distant continents or into funds in Geneva. Goodness knows where it went. But those are the type of corrupted companies in the really rapid transactions that we describe in every one of these organisations. And these are the guys that invented it, remember.
Yeah, what does this remind you of, George? 5 Arrows Finance Limited.
Yeah, I mean, what we talked about the other day, about one member of the family and the Gilbert Foundation and all the links into the Bruno character that led the Israeli Central Bank and then led the World Bank for a time and had 4 degrees from Harvard, Cambridge, the LSE, I can't remember what the last one was, it might have been Georgetown. And you know, these are super elites, super rich people that hand-pick their colleagues for their capacity to engage in a thing called peer pressure. You understand that? You get powerful people. If the powerful people come together, you can send the world to war at your whim. Yeah, and you fund both sides. You get reparations paid by the loser, but the winner still has to pay the massive rates of interest on the loan they've taken, which is why we still have sovereign debt crises. It's just amazing. And now that I've said we had a beautiful red sunset, I have a massive black cloud hanging over my home, just because we're describing this. Yeah? Right then, shall we go back to the list and scan down it again until we see something interesting? Or are you getting bored with this already?
I don't know what's happened, but the list I've put up, NM Rothschild and Sons Limited.
Yeah, if you click on the arrow that points backwards and you hold it down, you'll see where we need to go. Okay, so you just want to go back to the original search that we found, and it's
Rothschild Limited.
Rothschild Company and Director search.
Oh, okay.
So click on the arrow and hold the button down. That's the left arrow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
If you hold it down and then click on Rothschild Company and Director search rather. Okay, and that gets us back to the same point in time that we left that registry, because we're looking straight at the face of the Rothschild.
So, it says company results for Rothschilds. Yeah, I'm back on
it's the same list with 149 companies.
Yeah.
200. Yeah, and the Rothschild Diamonds Limited is now in the middle of that page.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you just press the back arrow, takes you back to the same point in time. So are you looking at the Rothschild Diamonds now? Hello?
Yeah.
Have you got it open on that same page where we clicked on?
Yeah, I'm just looking for the Rothschild Diamonds.
And I'll, just as you're looking for it, so at the top of your page you can see 149 companies.
Oh, I've got it here, George.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let me just reel off the number of postcodes in London that are relevant to this and the number of registered corporations. EC4, it's not just in London. EC4N 25 registrations. So that'll be the Whitechapel area, I think, where they began to take control, and they've now got the central bank in their thrall and all sorts of other institutions. My geography is a bit frail, but is that Whitechapel?
Yeah.
Okay. S1, SW1Y, SW1V, M25, TR26, WC1V, EC4A, GU24, L1, M3, Northwest 2, PL6, SK8, Southwest 10, EC4P 21 there, W1G, EC1V, SS2, SS, sinister looking one, W1S, BS8, EN2, HP23, L6, Milton Keynes 17, NW6, RG12, SO41, HP18, 13 there, W2, LE3, SW6, WC1R, E1, EX9, that's Exeter, familiar place since I discovered those networks in that spoken wheel model, KT10, LS17, N5, NW7, SG14, Southwest 1. Very close to the Parliament building, where Zahawi has his war criminal directorships. Okay, Rothschild Archive, Rothschild Reserve, Rothschild Investments Limited, Henry Rothschilds and Co. What about going to some director results now? That's the next block below. Have you got... Can you see Henry Rothschild at the bottom of the first 10 companies? John, are you scrolling down?
Yeah, but I think I'm on the wrong page, George.
Well, if you can see 149 companies, 276 directors.
Yeah, that's the page. I've got that page up. Yeah.
So open that page and go to the top of it, scan down till you get to the 10th company, which is Henry Rothschild, and then we can look at the list of directors.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a transition. So if we wanted to keep looking at companies where we're going to have to open 15 different pages, you would click on that next page button there. Okay, can you see that? Below Henry Rothschild, you could click on the previous page, but because this is page 1, you can't go back. But you could go to list 11 to 20 of the companies that are registered, of which there are nearly 150. But instead, to save time and so we don't bore our listeners, we're going to go now into the first of the director results for Rothschilds. Now that should mean that we're getting into a list of people's names. Yeah, and some of them are people's names, but the first one is an institution, the N.M. Rothschilds and Sons Limited, 903463742 EC4N 8AL, and those are the postcodes, EC4P 4DU. They don't give individual addresses for that until we open the sites. Okay, so let's click on it now. N.M. Rothschilds and Sons. You doing it? Hello? Hello? It's taken ages to open because they're very embarrassed by what we're doing. We're showing the whole of the persecuted world how they can dissect their current interests and holdings. And if we don't get this into our archive really quickly, then they will suppress access to it and they will fake up all of it. They will take a lot of the pages down, and it will happen like it happened in Toronto, as Gordon described, where they cover up all of the financial transactions at one of the most corrupted stock markets in the world, which is why Rob Ford pretended that he was a drug addict. Okay, this lot have only got 129 million as a combined asset value too. So none of these companies are relatively big on the scale of the P2 banks that we're talking about, but there are hundreds of them, and they've got empty shelves to receive money, and we know from the auditors that they completely deceive the tax man, and they completely deceive the investors on every scam that they enter into. And that's why we have 4 tax seasons now. We have Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. In every one of them they shuffle the money around so that they minimise the tax, they minimise the capacity to fool the investor and to suck in their money, and then they crash it or take it from them in a cheap shot financial crime. Yeah, and they're really good at it. The listeners should watch that movie on YouTube. It's exactly the same as they do things now. Right then, let's have a look at the directors here and see whether it's big family members or whether it's just functionaries. Okay, so what we're looking at is not actually a list of directors, it's a list of holdings. Can you see that? If you scan down below the director overview and the commitments that they give, or the summary that they give on the funds that they have, and it's registered, see, they're pretending it's an individual, which is why when you look at the year of birth it says unknown, and it's got a director ID, but it's not a person, it's a series of companies. Yeah, are you following that?
Yeah.
You sound awfully confused. It's ever so simple.
Listen, mate, I'm on a page here because there's just so many Rothschilds.
No. Well, let's go back to the beginning then. Click on the back arrow.
I'm back at the beginning now, George.
Click on the back arrow. Well, I need to go back to the beginning. So I'm going back to Rothschild Company and Director Check.
Yeah.
And we're going down to the second. So we're not interested now in companies. We've left the top 10 companies on the first page alone, and we've gone to director results for Rothschild. Are you seeing that in front of you now?
276, yeah.
Yeah. But have you scanned about a quarter of a way down that home page to see N.M. Rothschilds and Sons at the head of the list of 276 directors? Go to the top of the page.
Yes, I've got it, yeah.
Okay, right. Now click on N.M. Rothschilds and Sons and open it. Yeah, that's the first of the 276 listings.
Yeah, that's the one.
But that is not a director, as I've just told you. But if you click on it and open it, then we can have a look at what should be the director ID of the person But this is an institutional director. It has not been born.
I'm clicking it, but it won't open.
It takes ages because they're so ashamed of what they're doing and how articulate we are in exposing it. That's very big-headed of me to talk like that.
Well, no, I've never had anything this slow ever before, George. Oh, it's just flicked up.
Well, that implies that it's a massive.
Like that long before.
It's a massive listing, or they're particularly ashamed of where we're getting to now.
Oh my God, it's huge.
Yeah, it's fucking huge. Do you want to read it? Sorry, I said fucking. I should not say fucking. Try and keep my respectability. I'm in my own home. It can do very little harm, and there's nobody listening in apart from you. But by tomorrow, I'm hoping that we'll have 2,000 hits on this.
Good.
Okay, so
George, the list is so long, mate. I'd be here now reading it all out. It's just.
But it's interesting. Let me read it then. Rothschild's Continuation Finance, NM Rothschild's Holdings Limited, FA International Limited, Rothschild Private Fund Management Limited, Second Continuation Limited, New Court Property Services, OC Investments Limited, Rothschild's Investments Limited, Rothschild Holdings Limited, Rothschild's Continuation Finance Holdings Limited, for 2 or 3 times already, Rothschild Reserve Limited, Rothschild Gold Limited, Rothschild Nominees Limited, New Court Securities Limited, Walbrooks Asset Limited, Rothschild Employee Trustees Limited. Oh, their pensions may be okay, everybody else's are stuffed. Shield MBCA Limited, Elgin Scotland Capital Services Limited, Third New Court Limited, Rothschild Australia Holdings Limited, Rothschild Limited, Five Arrows Scotland General Partner Limited. I'll have to have a look at that sometime in the future.
Five Arrows, the Five Sons, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. So that's distributing this empire all over the globalised world. Rothschild Services 1 Limited, Rothschild Services 2 Limited, Rothschild HDF Investment Advisor Limited, Markplace Number 480 Limited, NM Rothschild Banking Limited, Rothschild Wealth Management. Oh, they might not be interested in that. You can't really take that seriously, can you, John? Rothschild Wealth Management, UK Limited, Continuation Computers Limited, Five Arrows Leasing Holdings Limited. So you have to pay for your ammunition, and you get to fetch it back so you can use it all over again. Shield Trust Limited, Five Arrows Finance Limited, Rothschild Trust Corporation Limited, Row Trust Nominees Limited, London Precious Metals Clearing Limited, London Gold Futures Market Limited, that's the stock exchange, the futures market. They're in there meddling with it, and they are pretending that this is a director that was never born. It has no birth date. It's a series of massive financial institutions, all of which are immune from regulation. The London Gold Market Fixing Limited, as if they might be interested in price swaps and fixing things. The London Gold Market Limited, the London Gold Market, the Rothschild's Continuation Limited, and lastly, the London Bullion Market Association. Now, if we were to look at the list of directors on these companies, I don't know how you find them, because this is supposed to be a list of directors. So let's see if that option is given us at the top. Yes, it is. Okay, so can you see that? We're in what should be a list of individuals.
Yeah.
There's no birth date for that. So let's see what we get.
All dissolved companies, George.
Are they all dissolved?
Every single one is dissolved.
No, they're not. If you look at the graph with the blue lines on it.
Oh, I'm looking at underneath that.
No, look at it.
Okay.
All of that graph goes up to 214. So every one of these institutions that's pretending to be an individual, aka a director, is still current. Some of them have got thin blue lines. So the NM Rothschild's Holdings Limited, we look at that further down and we'll find that that is SWIFT or something, some such. It's swapping money between these places or between vast continents, or bringing money in from Russia, or maybe the money that they got from Cyprus when they crashed the cash machines.
Yeah.
You remember that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a series of cheap shots tricks. What's your sunset like now? It's amazing here.
Well, it's because I'm down south. It's dark.
All right.
In the up north there. So.
Okay, so what did we want to look at for this? You
just finished reading down that list. I mean,
so there was a series of the companies at the bottom were crashed around 2004, because the blue lines go down to the bottom, and the gold companies.
Yeah. 2004, all around about the same time.
Yeah, and so what I'm tempted to do now is, we've seen the magnitude of that list, and we've said, oh, we couldn't have possibly get from top to bottom of that, but I've rushed through it. Let's see what we find now when we hit directors, and let's see which leaders of our nations.
So you're going to go back up to the top.
Go back to the top. You've got summary on the left, which we're just reading. And click on directors, and the next click we'll make is on structure. But let's see who the directors are, because this is massive, and there must be many. There'll be over 100 directors here.
I'm getting the same thing. It's just not loaded.
It will take time because it's massive, and because they're embarrassed that we're investigating it. The webmaster is a quisling. The people that control access to IT, all of the computer surveillance across the country, are paid by our Prime Minister, like Andy Coulson was.
There you go, it's just flicked on, George.
Okay.
I've never waited so long on this computer, ever.
Now,
it's quite fast.
So that name Jonathan Westcott has cropped up again. He's someone who I had never heard of until last night, but he's got 68 holdings within this group. 68 of them have been crashed. Oh no, 68 are still current. He's crashed only 4 of 72, so that's quite a conscientious period of service. And then you've got the secretary, who is the registered director, who is actually the institution. So it's completely twisted, and you can see why Mervyn King and his predecessor Eddie George were reluctant to engage in regulation at the Bank of England. Yeah, let's just scan it together. So that's FA International. If you use the down button to scan down, it's easier to control
I've got a wheel on my mouse, George.
Alright, okay. So FA International. Let's keep going down until one of us spots a name we want to talk about. Mr. James Mervyn no. So NM Rothschild and Son. Previous directors for that first company up there at the top, Swift Incorporations Limited. 263,000 of the 266,000 companies that they have dealt with have been crashed. Almost all of them. They were appointed for one day in 1994. That's how it works. That's the pump and dump thing that was the crashing of the global banks in 2008. It's as simple as that to do it.
It's too simple, George.
And these are all lords and ladies and leaders of nations for umpteen generations.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not their behaviours in the royal bedrooms are as bad as they used to be. In this day and age, I don't believe that they would be allowed to get away with that. But what we've read about what Greg Hallett describes about King Juan Carlos and Prince Philip and Lord Mountbatten and their rights still to prima nocte that was in the Braveheart film, as if that was cut out way back when we were allowed to execute people in Hollywood movies because they're pretending that it's a rack and pinion job and a disemboweling. But now that looks more realistic than any of the beheadings from Islam, which are there only to take the shame away from these financial crimes. Let's quickly go down, because I'm getting boring on this same topic.
Yeah.
There's a Morgan. Can you see him under the Rothschild Private Fund Management Limited? Can you see Morgan Johnson? NM Rothschilds again. But these are relatively small names. It's not like cabinet members, but they will be dedicated financial criminals, and they'll work really hard at that. There's the barber again that you thought might be a golfer. Tovels, Myers, Riches, Westcott. He keeps propping up. He's got huge numbers of holdings. Almost all of these companies, he's a presence in it. Sir Clive Anthony Whitmore, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild. There's one of them.
Yeah.
You keep going down. If you see a name that you recognise, just reel it off.
Barber's just popped.
Barber keeps popping up. It's the same person. He's only got 16 holdings. Adrian Edward King. Now that could be Merv the Swerve. Yeah, Mervyn King was the central banker, and they do not think twice about changing their name. And you know the Adrian thing is a joke about the religion.
Yeah.
Sullivan's, Aish, Vince, Coughlin, Chapman, Westcott again. He seems to be a pivot. I'm going to have to look into him. Here we go. Honourable. Now we're down to Rothschild Holdings Limited. Previous directors and secretaries. Honourable Amschel, Mayor James Rothschild. Mervyn King right below him, if Adrian is actually Mervyn King. Bernard Myers. You remember the Myers man that was in the spy movies? Mike Myers. Yeah, there's the cover up for that. You remember in those big lists that we talked about the London Stock Exchange?
Yeah.
About the man that was in the Johnny English film?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just all cover. Oh, fuck. Oh, pardon me, I said it again. Mr. Michael John Paul Marks. That is likely the corrupted boss that crashed the Co-op Bank. Yeah, did I tell you about the corrupted Co-op Bank and its crashing? And all the letters that I sent to them several years ago now, and they are also pretending that they're corrupted directors who have taken over from him. He got a 5 million bung, declared bung, to desert the bank and hand it over to the Lloyds Verdi project. The Lloyds Verdi is an island away out in the Atlantic, and it's just a joke that they have taken all of that mutual funds, and Peter Marks appeared on top. You notice that they use all the biblical names?
Yeah.
Michael John Paul Marks, Peter Marks, the first pope after Jesus walked the earth. Sir Clive Whitmore, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, Sir John Whittaker Fairclough. That Barber's in almost every one of the lists. I don't know what role he plays. George Triton, Shannon, Westcott.